What can we expect from Iowa this year? Obviously, the defense will be great. I think that's something you can always count on Iowa year in and year out. You always have confidence in their defense. Phil Parker gets it done every single year. I've said before, I think he's probably the most patient man in America because he knows the product on the other side of the ball and what he needs to put out to be competitive in the Big Ten conference. He knows that their offense isn't going to be great, so he knows that the defense needs to be absolutely stellar, and he devises game plans and develops players like no other. You can always count on him to have a great defense. But now Brian Ferentz is out at OC after having horrid offenses over the past few years. And a lot of people thought that it was long overdue to get Brian Ferentz out. Obviously, he probably had a longer stint because his father Kirk has been the head coach since the Stone Age. But they last year they gave him a chance to redeem himself. They instituted the Ferentz clause, which Brian Ferentz needed to average 25 points per game as one of the clauses to keep his job moving forward as offensive coordinator. Well, he fell well short of that. He averaged 15 points per game. But on the flip side, Iowa held opponents to 14 points per game, which really has been their MO for them being successful over the past few years. But, watching the Iowa offense it was worse than watching paint dry. But now they bring in Tim Lester. Now there's hope. So Tim Lester had strong offensive production at Western Michigan for 6 years prior to joining here. He was with the Packers, just before this year. But at Western Michigan, he put 3 receivers in the draft: Sky Moore, Dwayne Eskridge, and Corey Davis. Those are 2 second-rounders and 1 as a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. Those are things that receiver that Iowa has not even been able to dream of doing. They're so far from that. So I think he'll be able to come in and at least put his fingerprint on the offense. He's familiar with the area, so that will help with recruiting and connecting with families and kids. I'm not sure how much control Kirk Ferentz will want to institute over over this offense and still have control over it. But at the very least, I think Lester will be able to balance this out a little bit and have a little more creativity other than just running zone off of the edge for 3 or 4 yards to keep the sticks moving and run the clock out, which is pretty much has been their strategy over the past few years because they haven't been able to establish anything in the pass game. But now we enter a world, and this is where it gets pretty interesting. We enter a world where the Big Ten West doesn't exist. And I think Iowa has been able to capitalize on having an outstanding defense with a average to below average offense, and have their defense been able to keep them afloat on top of their special teams. But now those divisions are gone. So I think Iowa before, I think their defense was a tad inflated due to the level of competition it was facing offensively. However, now that we don't have divisions, for Iowa this year, it's not really any different than what it previously has been. They are kind of the beneficiaries of for this season alone, of their schedule. So they get Ohio State from the East, the old East, but they avoid Penn State, they avoid Michigan, they avoid Oregon, they avoid USC. I mean, those are the offense that could take advantage of Iowa. We saw what Penn State was able to do to Iowa last year. We saw what Michigan did to Iowa last year in the in the conference championship game. So we saw what these good offenses can do to these defenses, and when the Iowa offense can't keep up. So what do we expect from them this year? I expect them to be marginally better on offense. I still don't think that they have great options at receiver. We'll see what Cade McNamara ends up being. I don't think they'll be 10 points per game better, which would get them to that 25 point per game average that Brian Ferentz was tasked to do. But I think with their schedule, they have a real opportunity to go 11-1 here. I think, the Ohio State game is the really one game you can slot in as okay, that's a loss. But every other game on their schedule, they're going to be favored in. And if they're not, it's going to be a short dog. So I think they're going to have a really good chance at competing and getting a shot at the conference championship this year, which is crazy to say because of how stacked this conference is with now Oregon and Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State. But the Iowa schedule really lends itself to be successful and to get themselves to that level. Follow Big Body Ball on all socials: YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter.